Woke Hollywood panic over toxic fans and YouTube ruining their DEI. Of course, there's no such thing as toxic fans or toxic fandoms. The same way there's no such thing as toxic males. It's just a nonsense propaganda term. Two ways you know that. One, we've never heard the term before except for the last few years when they tried to push an agenda through established franchises. Here's the other way you know. It only applies to one side. Propaganda is by definition mass media, one-sided brainwashing. Were you to ever suggest there was such a thing as toxic females or toxic studios attacking toxic brands, you would be called a racist, a bigot, or something even worse. Even Hollywood themselves, in The Hollywood Reporter, is questioning maybe Disney doesn't know how to make Star Wars movies anymore. They know how to make a Star Wars show. Even The Mandalorian was pretty good. The creation of Baby Yoda, that was pretty good. They're just choosing not to because they can't use it to push a social agenda. From The Hollywood Reporter, is Disney bad at Star Wars? An analysis, and it goes on for 3,000 words to give a detailed analysis of what Disney's done with Star Wars. But today we're talking about this from Variety, Toxic Fandom, how Hollywood is battling fans who are just out for blood, from social media boot camps to superfan focus groups. The idea of utilizing a superfan focus group, going to fans and saying, hey, what do you think of this idea? Hey, what do you think of that idea? Is a good idea. It's not like fans aren't accessible. You actually don't even really need to do that because there are so many fans that are talking about the projects and the franchises and the brands that they love. You don't actually need to even go out into the public and try to get a group together of super fans. Just look at the people who obviously are in love with the brand. They're passionate about the brand. See what they're talking about, see what they're excited about, and do things that fit that. But if that's too much work, if that's too difficult, if that doesn't satisfy, like, all right, but we do need to do some female version of this character, how do we get this to a super fan type of group and see how upset they are about it? See if they might get angry at us and cause this to be a financial failure? Sure, you could put together a group and then solicit feedback from them on these new progressive ideas, on these political ideology versions of franchises. And you would have thought that before they would have made these changes, before they would have damaged or risked the value of a multi-billion-dollar brand like Star Wars or a multi-billion-dollar brand like Marvel, they would have at least gone to the trouble to solicit feedback from fans. But no, that was too much work. Or was it about the effort? Or was it more about just deliberately destroying the brands so they'd be gone and perhaps they could make a little bit of money over what was left over from the rubble? The lead of the Star Wars series, The Acolyte, posted an 8.5-minute video to her Instagram stories about Lucasfilm's abrupt decision not to pick up the show for a second season just a month after the season 1 finale streamed on Disney+. There was nothing abrupt about that decision. They need to make decisions about what series are going to get renewed. What are they going to commit extra dollars to, and what are they not going to commit extra dollars to? It recently came out that The Acolyte was actually something they spent more money on than was initially known. Now, in my research and doing videos about Disney and what they're doing with Disney+, they appear to be spending around $25 million or more on every Star Wars episode of a Disney Plus series that they do. Similarly, same kind of thing with Marvel. When they did The Mandalorian, the budget was around $15 million. Apparently, we don't really know what the budgets are, even when they file documents. We don't know what all the expenses are, even when they file documents, or how they allocate for their offices in California. Is that part of their expenses? I don't think so. It might be, but it also might not be. But there's no big surprise that when The Acolyte had terrible ratings and people just didn't like it and it was clearly damaging the brand further, that they wouldn't renew something like that. And even Amandla was not surprised. Quote, "It's not a huge shock for me," Stenberg said. "Since the series was announced in 2020, she continued, we started experiencing a rampage of, I would say, hyper-conservative bigotry and vitriol, prejudice, hatred, and hateful language toward us. Or, to translate, You didn't get the response that you wanted, so you accuse everyone of being racist. Okay, that's a very typical response. We get it. Nothing special about Amandla. In other words, the acolyte was the latest high-profile target of toxic fandom, the catch-all term to attack fans for when fan criticism turns from what they call good faith dissatisfaction into a relentlessly negative, often bigoted online campaign against either the project or its stars or creative leaders. In a franchise economy increasingly dependent upon established audience devotion to drive the bottom line, the threat of toxic fandoms poisoning that enthusiasm has become a seemingly intractable headache for almost every studio. Notice there was no toxic fandom associated with Deadpool. There was no toxic fandom associated with Inside Out 2. And you have to wonder why. You have to say, well, what was different about those two projects? Did all the, quote, toxic fans just somehow disappear? Well, no, they didn't disappear. The critics didn't disappear. There just really wasn't all that much to criticize. So no one had a negative comment to make about any of the people involved with either of those two projects. Except, of course, for the toxic fans on the other side that are really upset that there's no DEI in Deadpool and Wolverine. There's no love relationship between female characters in Inside Out 2, which they are upset about. Well, the secret wasn't that she had a secret crush on someone of the same gender. That didn't happen. And yes, there were several articles complaining about that. Quote, it comes with the territory, but it's gotten incredibly loud in the last couple of years, says a veteran marketing executive at a major studio. People are just out for blood regardless. They think the purity of the first version will never be replaced. Or if you've done something to upset the canon of a beloved franchise, and they're going to take you down for doing so. And that is something that was interesting that developed from all of this criticism of these woke projects. It actually works. It actually does create enough of an alternative narrative to know if you don't like Captain Marvel, it doesn't make you a bad person. If you don't like what they've done to Star Wars, it doesn't make you a bad person. If you felt that Black Panther 2 not having a character like the Black Panther actually in the movie was ridiculous and not something good, you are free to comment about that. And these comments are really what the public feels for the most part. People are sensible and they see these things and know they're not going to be washed over by propaganda. When you're trying to push ideology, the public does notice. And yes, there is a large counterculture of people that are not interested in this woke culture. Sometimes toxic fandoms behave reactively. A House of the Dragon episode featuring two female characters kissing, and an episode of The Last of Us focusing on a gay couple were both review bombed. The practice of mobbing sites like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb with negative user reviews, which gained mainstream attention following the premiere of 2017 Star Wars The Last Jedi. And an entire YouTube ecosystem devoted to declaring projects like The Marvels and The Boys woke garbage. Well, yes, those are woke garbage, but when you have the director of The Last of Us saying he's out there to trick the audience to push his political agenda, it is something that people are going to respond to. We know when people are lying to us, or when we uncover that people have been lying to us, we may respond online and say, we feel like other people do. We don't need to be lied to. We don't need to be manipulated. Just tell us a good story, and we will patronize whatever you're trying to sell us. From The Independent, The Last of Us director says he wanted to trick viewers into watching episode 3's gay romance. But when people respond negatively to being tricked into watching an episode that maybe they would have watched or not watched if you would have just been upfront with the audience, okay, you might get some negative response from that. Stop trying to trick and manipulate people. Just tell the story you have to tell, and we'll tell you if we like it. Perhaps the greatest irony of this phenomenon is the disproportionate impact these toxic fandoms have relative to their actual number. Quote, the vast majority of any fandom are casual fans, says Vice President of Star Trek Brand Development, who's been with the storied franchise since the 1990s. Quote, the number of people who live and die on their franchises are very, very few, and then those who come after things that they espouse to love with a venom are really, really a tiny subset of that already smaller subset of fandom. It's just much easier to see it now. I don't know that it's really that much broader than where things were in 1995. It's just that the bullhorn wasn't there. The bullhorn. Does this guy remember? The guy have the wrong person in charge of Vice President of Star Trek Brand Development. Apparently he forgot. When people really love a franchise, when people love a storyline, a brand, it does matter. It is the life and death of the brand. The one brand owner that should know and understand that the best is the Star Trek brand. There's no one else that has seen that as black and white as the Star Trek people. For some, combating that bullhorn amounts to acting as if they can't hear it. Quote, particularly when it's a negative, toxic conversation, we don't even engage as a TV marketing executive. Like with toxic people, you try not to give it too much oxygen. One principal concern is that reacting to these kinds of attacks risks alienating fans who are unhappy with creative choices about a franchise but haven't tipped over into abusive behavior. So a studio may attempt to amplify friendlier voices instead. We'll reply to comments that are positive and elevate those things, says the TV executive. Well, of course, that actually doesn't work. There isn't enough positive when you do terrible things to establish brands. Still, toxic fandoms have grown so pernicious that they've become a fact of life for many, and so powerful that while talent, executives, and publicists will privately bemoan the issue, fear of inadvertently triggering another backlash kept several studios from speaking for this story even on background, which is to say, like on an anonymous basis. Those who did talk with Variety all agreed that the best defense is to avoid provoking fandoms in the first place. They've been doing this for how many years, and it took them that long to figure this out? In addition to standard focus group testing, studios will assemble a specialized cluster of superfans to assess possible marketing materials for a major franchise project. Quote, they're very vocal, says the studio executive. They will just tell us, if you do that, fans are going to retaliate. These groups have even led studios to alter the projects. Quote, if it's early enough and the movie isn't finished yet, we can make those kinds of changes. It's incredible to think that any of these studios don't have people that understand their brands well enough that they couldn't just do this internally. Several studio insiders say they often put their talent through a social media boot camp. In some cases, when a character is intentionally challenging a franchise's status quo, studios will, with the actor's permission, take over their social media accounts entirely. The cast of The Rings of Power condemned the relentless racism, threats, harassment, and abuse some of our castmates of color are being subjected to on a daily basis, and actors from the Lord of the Rings film trilogy posted photos of themselves wearing clothing featuring the ears of Middle-earth creatures in multiple skin tones underneath the message, "You are all welcome here," written in Elvish. Those efforts may have had an effect. In an August interview with Amazon MGM Studios TV chief Vernon Sanders about The Rings of Power, the executive said the show hadn't experienced the same racist hostility in advance of season 2 that had greeted its 2022 debut. I think a lot of people have just kind of given up on that series and don't even pay attention to it anymore, and maybe they're just lucky, I don't know. Quote, people have had a chance to actually engage with the show, he said. Overwhelmingly, what we've seen is that folks who came with an open mind can discuss and debate their favorite things, which takes you out of the place of that ugly conversation that happened with some folks who may have been infused with an agenda that's separate from the show itself. As if the show itself never had an agenda. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.